to hop up on here to make sure everybody is aware of what is going on right now. I am seized, obviously, by the Charlie Kirk assassination trial, and I want to make sure I'm breaking down to the public what is happening, because there is a hearing live right now, the defense versus the prosecution. Prosecution is representing Erika Kirk because she is the victim on this case, and you might recall that Erika did this news hit a while ago. It was kind of weird, where she just asserted, and then they passed around, that she really wanted to make sure that her right to a speedy trial was observed, okay? And I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. Like, why? Well, it turns out that now we are understanding that this is going to be the prosecution's strategy, and I will be very clear here. I do not believe Tyler Robinson assassinated Charlie Kirk, and I believe that Turning Point USA is implicated in this moment in a cover-up of sorts, okay? What various roles were played, but to me, looking at the evidence, which I have done more than anybody else, there is a cover-up taking place, and this hearing proves it, okay? So they were supposed to have a probable cause hearing in May. It is slated on the calendar. When they agreed to do this in May, the defense, Tyler Robinson's defense, was like, well, we shouldn't set a date until we all get our discovery requests. And they were like, we're just going to put it on the calendar. Don't worry. We're just going to throw it on the calendar. And then, of course, if you guys don't have what you need, the case will not go forward. Lo and behold, Erika goes on Fox News and says, I want to make sure to speedy trial on the victim, whatever. And so now we're hearing that directly from the defense, and the prosecution is not disputing this, they both agree that the ATF and the FBI will not hand over their data files that they have had in their possession since September, despite multiple requests from the defense. They're like, we literally cannot have this hearing because we have not been given any data files. What am I talking about? This is crucial. Erika's team is arguing, we want the hearing to go through anyways, it's just a probable cause hearing. Okay, but they are basing this probable cause hearing, they want this to be televised, and they're going to say, what evidence do you have that Tyler Robinson did this? And the prosecution is going to say, well, we have his fingerprints that are on the gun. Well, what they're not telling you is that they're saying they have his fingerprints on the gun. That's just a summary report that the FBI gave to the defense. The defense is saying, okay, now can we see the digitized files? Can we see the fingerprints? Can we see your process and how you got this? No. You just get the summary. The summary report is all you need. No, actually, we need to make sure that what you're saying you saw and what you have is.
The moment Candace Owens went live, this entire case stopped being just another courtroom story and turned into something way bigger. Because what she said didn't just challenge the narrative, it flipped it completely. Up until now, the focus had been locked on one name, Tyler Robinson. The accused. The center of the case. The person the public was told to look at. But in a matter of minutes, that spotlight started shifting. And not slowly, fast. Because instead of asking, did Tyler do it? Candace started asking a different question. Why does it feel like no one is allowed to fully examine the evidence? And that's where things got uncomfortable. Because in any case this serious, evidence is supposed to be the strongest part. Transparent, verifiable, solid. But according to what's coming out of this hearing, that's not what's happening. The defense is asking for the actual data, the raw files, the forensic breakdown, the process behind the claims, and they are being told no. Not yet. Just take the summary. Trust it. And that's where Erika Kirk suddenly becomes part of the conversation in a way people didn't expect. Because this push for a speedy trial that once sounded like a grieving family seeking justice now feels different when you line it up with everything else. The timing, the urgency, the resistance to slowing things down. Because rushing something like this doesn't just move the process forward, it locks the narrative in place before anyone can fully question it. And that's the shift people are starting to notice. Because if the case is as strong as it's being presented, then why does it feel like parts of it are being kept just out of reach? Why is the foundation hidden while the conclusion is being pushed into the spotlight? And more importantly, if this really is about justice, then why does it feel like someone is trying to control how the story gets told before the full picture is even visible? The moment Candace Owens went live, the tone around this case shifted fast. Not because she introduced confirmed new evidence, but because she challenged how the story is being told in real time. And when someone with her platform starts asking questions while a hearing is unfolding, people don't just listen, they start reevaluating everything they thought they understood. Up to this point, most of the public focus has been centered on Tyler Robinson. The case, as presented, appears to hinge on claims like fingerprints on a weapon and a timeline placing him at the scene. On paper, that sounds straightforward. But what Candace highlighted wasn't the accusation itself, it was the process behind it. Specifically, the difference between being told what the evidence says and actually being allowed to examine that evidence in full detail. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. Because in any serious legal case, especially one under this level of public attention, the defense isn't just entitled to a summary, they are entitled to the underlying data. The raw materials, the methodology, the chain of custody, how the conclusion was reached, not just the conclusion itself. According to what was discussed in the hearing, the defense has requested access to those deeper materials from agencies like the FBI and ATF, but says they've only received summarized reports so far. Now, to be clear, summaries are a normal part of legal proceedings. But they are not supposed to replace full disclosure, especially when the defense is actively preparing to challenge the evidence. And this is where the tension begins. Because at the same time that the defense is asking for more detailed access, there's also a push to move forward with a probable cause hearing. And not just any hearing, a potentially televised one. That combination, limited access to underlying data alongside pressure to proceed publicly, is what Candace kept circling back to. Not as proof of wrongdoing, but as a situation that raises legitimate questions about timing and transparency. Because if a case is strong, the expectation is that it can withstand scrutiny. And scrutiny requires visibility, not just of conclusions, but of the process behind them. This is also where Erika Kirk becomes part of the conversation, not as someone accused of a crime, but as a central figure in how the case is being perceived publicly. Reports suggest she has emphasized the importance of a speedy trial, which, in many contexts, is understandable. Delays can be difficult for families, for defendants, and for the public trying to make sense of what's happening. But when you place that urgency alongside the defense's claim that they haven't received full access to evidence yet, it creates a tension that's hard to ignore. Because speed and thoroughness don't always align. And when a process moves forward quickly while key details are still being requested, people naturally begin to ask whether the pace is helping clarity or limiting it. Candace's framing leaned heavily into that tension. She didn't present a final answer. Instead, she emphasized the gap between what is being asserted and what has been fully shared. And that approach resonates with a lot of viewers, not because it confirms a theory, but because it taps into a broader concern about how information is controlled in high-profile cases. At the same time, it's important to keep the broader context in mind. Legal proceedings often involve complex timelines, protected materials, and procedural steps that don't always appear intuitive from the outside. Agencies like the FBI and ATF operate under strict protocols, and delays in releasing certain types of data can sometimes be tied to those internal processes rather than any attempt to obscure information. But perception doesn't always wait for full explanations. And right now, perception is being shaped in real time. On one side, you have the official process moving forward, with claims being presented and hearings being scheduled. On the other side, you have public figures like Candace Owens raising questions about whether everything that should be visible is actually being made available. And when those two things happen at the same time, forward motion and rising skepticism, it creates a very specific kind of pressure. Because the more attention the case receives, the more important transparency becomes. Not just for the outcome, but for public trust in how that outcome is reached. That's why even smaller details are starting to carry more weight than they normally would. The distinction between a summary report and full forensic data. The timing of requests versus the timing of hearings. The decision to potentially televise a proceeding before all parties say they've received what they need. None of these elements, on their own, prove anything. But together, they shape how the situation is being interpreted. An interpretation is powerful, especially in cases that unfold in the public eye. Because once people start questioning the process, they don't just look at what's being presented, they look at what's missing. They look for alignment. They compare timelines. They revisit earlier statements. And every new detail is viewed through that evolving lens. What makes this moment particularly significant is that it's still early in the process. The probable cause hearing isn't the final step, it's just one phase in a much longer legal journey. That means the questions being raised now aren't conclusions, they are part of an ongoing examination. And as more information becomes available, the narrative can still shift in multiple directions. But right now, the conversation isn't slowing down, it's expanding. Because the focus has moved beyond a single question of guilt or innocence and into something broader, how the case is being handled, how information is being shared, and how those choices influence what the public believes is happening. And that shift, from outcome to process, is what keeps people watching. Because outcomes take time. But the process is unfolding in real time. And the more closely people watch it, the more they start asking a question that doesn't have a simple answer yet. If everything is as strong as it's being presented, then why does the conversation feel more uncertain the deeper you look into it? What makes this situation even more intense isn't just what's happening inside the courtroom, it's what's happening outside of it at the exact same time. Because while legal arguments are being made, a completely separate battle is unfolding in the court of public opinion. And in that space, perception can move faster than facts. After Candace Owens went live, the ripple effect was immediate. Clips started circulating, commentary channels picked it up, and suddenly the conversation wasn't just about Tyler Robinson anymore, it was about the structure of the case itself. Not what happened, but how is this being handled? That's a much more dangerous question for any high-profile case. Because once people stop focusing on the accused and start focusing on the system, every decision begins to look like a signal. Every delay, every omission, every push forward, it all gets interpreted. And one of the biggest pressure points right now is this idea of a televised probable cause hearing. On paper, transparency sounds like a good thing. Let the public see what's happening. Let everything play out in the open. But here's where the tension kicks in. Transparency only works when both sides have equal access to the full picture. If one side is saying, "We haven't received the full underlying data yet," and the other side is saying, "Let's proceed anyway, and let's do it publicly," that creates a mismatch. Not necessarily wrongdoing, but a mismatch in readiness. And when that mismatch becomes visible, people start asking whether the spotlight is being used to clarify, or to reinforce a narrative before it can be challenged. That's the core of what Candace was pushing. Not a final claim, but a framing. Is the process moving faster than the verification? Now layer in another dimension, the emotional context. Because this isn't just a legal case. It's tied to a public figure, a tragic event, and a network of people and organizations connected to that figure. That means every action carries emotional weight. When Erika Kirk is mentioned in this context, it's not just about legal positioning, it's about how her role is perceived. Publicly, she's positioned as someone seeking resolution, pushing for movement, and wanting the case to proceed. And again, in many situations, that's understandable. But when that urgency intersects with unresolved procedural questions, it changes how people interpret it. Because now it's not just urgency, it can be seen as pressure. And whether that perception is accurate or not, once it takes hold, it spreads quickly. This is where things get even more layered. Because alongside the courtroom developments, there are also conversations about internal shifts, organizational changes, staff movements, and decisions happening behind the scenes. None of these, on their own, confirm anything about the case. But when they happen at the same time as a high-profile investigation, people naturally start connecting dots. And that's the key word here, connecting. Not proving. Not confirming. Connecting. Because human nature fills gaps. If information isn't fully visible, people build narratives to make sense of what they can see. And the more fragmented the information feels, the more creative, and sometimes more extreme, those narratives become. That's why the issue of evidence access is so critical. Not just for the defense, but for public trust. Because if the defense is asking, can we see the actual forensic data, not just the summary? That's a technical request. But to the public, it translates into something much simpler: why can't they see everything yet? And that question doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It gets repeated. It evolves. Suddenly, it's not just about fingerprints or timelines, it's about confidence. Confidence in the process. Confidence that what's being presented is complete. Confidence that when a conclusion is reached, it won't immediately be challenged as incomplete or rushed. Because here's the reality: cases like this don't just end in a courtroom. They live on in public memory. And if there's even a lingering perception that something wasn't fully examined, that perception can outlast any official ruling. That's why this moment matters so much. Not because it determines the final outcome, but because it shapes how that outcome will be received. And right now, the reception is still being formed. You have one side emphasizing progress, moving forward, holding hearings, presenting claims. You have another side emphasizing verification, requesting data, questioning timing, asking for more visibility. And in between those two positions is the public, trying to decide which one feels more convincing. What complicates it further is that both positions can exist at the same time without either being inherently wrong. Legal processes do move forward while evidence is still being analyzed. At the same time, defenses do push back when they feel they don't have everything they need. But when those two realities collide in a high-profile case, it doesn't feel like routine procedure, it feels like friction. And friction attracts attention. That's why every new development is being watched so closely. Not just for what it reveals, but for how it fits into the larger pattern. Does it add clarity? Or does it raise more questions? Does it slow things down for accuracy? Or speed things up for resolution? Because the direction this case takes from here isn't just about evidence, it's about confidence. And confidence isn't built by what's said, it's built by what can be seen, tested, and verified. Right now, that process is still unfolding. And until it fully plays out, the conversation isn't going to settle. If anything, it's only getting louder. Because the deeper people look, the more they start realizing, this isn't just a case about one person. It's a case about how the entire system responds when the spotlight is at its brightest. At this stage, something subtle, but powerful, has started to happen. The conversation is no longer just about evidence, timelines, or even the courtroom. It's about who controls the story. Because once a case reaches this level of visibility, facts alone don't shape public understanding, narratives do. And right now, there are multiple narratives competing at the same time. On one side, you have the official version, a structured legal process, a suspect in Tyler Robinson, and a system moving step by step toward a conclusion. That narrative is built on procedure, hearings, filings, summaries, and timelines. It's designed to feel stable, methodical, and authoritative. On the other side, you have a growing wave of skepticism, amplified by voices like Candace Owens, questioning whether the process is as transparent as it should be. This narrative isn't built on confirmed conclusions either, it's built on gaps, inconsistencies, and unanswered questions. And here's the key difference. The official narrative tells you what is happening. The skeptical narrative asks why it's happening that way. That shift from what to why is where things start to feel bigger than just a case. Because when people begin questioning why certain decisions are being made, they are no longer just observing, they are analyzing. They are comparing. They are challenging. And that's when a case stops being contained within legal boundaries and starts expanding into a broader public debate. Take the idea of timing, for example. Timing is everything in both law and media. When information is released, when hearings are scheduled, when statements are made, it all shapes perception. Right now, critics are pointing to what they see as a tight sequence of events. Requests for deeper evidence access. Resistance or delay in providing full data. Simultaneous push to move forward publicly. Again, none of this automatically proves wrongdoing. But it creates a perception that the story is being stabilized quickly, before every detail has been fully explored in the public eye. And perception, especially in the digital era, spreads faster than any official clarification ever could. Now bring media into the equation. Because media doesn't just report stories, it frames them. What gets highlighted, what gets minimized, what gets repeated, that determines how millions of people interpret the same set of facts. When a figure like Candace Owens goes live and frames the situation as a question of transparency, that framing travels. It gets clipped, reposted, debated. And suddenly, people who weren't following the case closely are now engaging with it, but through a very specific lens. At the same time, traditional outlets may focus more on procedural updates, hearings scheduled, statements made, official positions. That creates a different lens, one that emphasizes order and progression rather than uncertainty. So now you have two parallel realities forming. One that feels structured and controlled. One that feels uncertain and unresolved. And the public is caught between them, trying to decide which one feels more complete. This is where Erika Kirk remains a central figure, not because of proven claims, but because of her position at the intersection of both narratives. In the official narrative, she's connected to the legal process, as someone seeking resolution and movement. In the skeptical narrative, her actions, especially around timing and urgency, are interpreted as part of a broader push to define the story quickly. Those are two very different interpretations of the same actions. And until more concrete information emerges, both interpretations continue to exist side by side. That's what makes this moment so volatile. Because the case hasn't reached its conclusion yet, but the public narrative is already being formed. And once narratives solidify, they are incredibly difficult to reverse, even if new information later changes the picture. That's why transparency isn't just a legal concept here, it's a narrative one. The more people feel they can see, verify, and understand, the more stable the narrative becomes. The less they feel that way, the more space opens up for speculation. And right now, that space is wide open. You can see it in how quickly discussions escalate online. A single detail, like access to evidence, turns into a broader conversation about trust. A procedural step, like scheduling a hearing, turns into a debate about timing and intent. Everything is being interpreted through a lens that goes beyond the surface. And that's where this case starts to feel like more than just a legal proceeding. It becomes a test case, not just of what happened, but of how information is handled when the stakes are high and the audience is massive. Because in situations like this, the outcome isn't just a verdict. It's also the answer to a much bigger question. Can the process itself hold up under this level of scrutiny? Not just legally, but publicly. And right now, that question is still unanswered. Which means the story isn't slowing down. It's building. Because when a situation like this starts pulling attention from every direction, media, public figures, online communities, and legal scrutiny, it doesn't just test the case. It tests the people and systems around it. And that's where things begin to feel like they are approaching a breaking point. Up until now, most of the focus has been on what's visible: hearings, statements, commentary. But beneath that surface, there are signals, subtle ones, that suggest something more complex is unfolding behind the scenes. Not confirmed facts, but patterns people are watching closely. One of those patterns is organizational tension. Whenever a high-profile figure is suddenly removed from the picture, especially someone as central as Charlie Kirk, the structure around them doesn't just continue smoothly. There's a shift. A vacuum. Decisions have to be made quickly, sometimes faster than systems are designed to handle. And when decisions happen under pressure, they don't always look clean from the outside. Reports and discussions circulating online point to things like internal changes, staff uncertainty, and moments where communication didn't seem fully aligned. Again, none of this confirms wrongdoing, but it does paint a picture of an environment dealing with sudden stress and rapid transition. Now layer that environment on top of an active legal case. Because when internal pressure meets external scrutiny, every action becomes amplified. A routine decision can look strategic. A delay can look intentional. A quick move can look like urgency, or like control. And that's exactly where the conversation is sitting right now. Take a step back and look at the timing of everything. A major event triggers a legal case. Public attention spikes immediately. Internal structures are forced to adapt quickly. Legal proceedings begin moving forward. At the same time, questions about transparency start surfacing. That's not a calm environment. That's a high-pressure system. And high-pressure systems don't just produce outcomes, they produce fractures. Not necessarily visible ones at first, but small cracks. Moments where things don't line up perfectly. Moments where communication feels off. Moments where the pace of events feels faster than the clarity of information. Those are the moments people are focusing on now. Because when everything is aligned, those cracks don't appear. But when pressure builds, they start to show, and once they show, they get analyzed, replayed, and debated. This is also where the idea of narrative control becomes even more intense. Because in a high-pressure situation, controlling the narrative isn't just about image, it's about stability. If the story stays consistent, the system feels stable. If the story starts to shift or fragment, the system feels uncertain. And uncertainty is what drives the current wave of attention. You can see it in how people are reacting to even the smallest developments. A statement gets dissected. A timeline gets questioned. A procedural step gets interpreted in multiple ways. That doesn't happen when people feel confident in the process. It happens when people feel like they are still trying to figure out what they are looking at. And right now, that's exactly where things stand. There's no final conclusion yet. No definitive resolution. Just a series of developments unfolding under intense scrutiny. But here's what makes this phase different from the earlier ones. Earlier, the focus was on what happened. Now, the focus is on whether everything around it makes sense. And that's a much harder question to answer. Because it doesn't rely on a single piece of evidence. It relies on consistency across everything: the timeline, the process, the communication, the access to information. If all of those align, confidence builds. If even a few of them feel off, confidence drops, and questions multiply. That's why this moment feels like a turning point. Not because the case is ending, but because the pressure is peaking. The system is being tested from multiple angles at once. Legally, through hearings and evidence. Publicly, through commentary and analysis. Internally, through rapid adjustments and decisions. And when all three of those pressures converge, something has to give. Either clarity increases, through more transparency, more information, and more alignment. Or the uncertainty deepens, through continued gaps, delays, or conflicting interpretations. Right now, it could still go either way. But one thing is clear. This is no longer just a case moving through the system quietly. It's a situation being watched, questioned, and interpreted in real time by a massive audience. And when that many eyes are locked in, every next move matters more than the last. Because the next move doesn't just advance the case. It shapes whether people believe the process itself is holding together under pressure. Now everything comes down to one thing: what happens next? Because at this stage, the case isn't just moving forward, it's balancing on two completely different paths. And which path it takes will determine not just the outcome, but how that outcome is accepted by the public. Right now, the tension you're seeing isn't random. It's the result of two forces pulling in opposite directions. Speed versus verification. Narrative versus transparency. Confidence versus doubt. And whichever side gains ground first, defines the ending of this story. Let's break down both paths, because this is where things get real. Path 1, clarity wins, system holds together. If the system stabilizes, it's going to look like this. The defense gets full access to the underlying data, everything they've been asking for. Not just summaries, but the actual forensic files, the methodology, the chain of custody. The kind of detail that allows independent verification. Once that happens, two things follow. The arguments become concrete. No more speculation about what's missing, everything is on the table. The narrative tightens. Because when information is complete, there's less room for interpretation. If the evidence holds up under that level of scrutiny, then the case against Tyler Robinson becomes stronger, not just legally, but publicly. And that's key. Because a verdict alone isn't enough in a case like this. It has to feel credible. It has to feel like every question was addressed, every angle examined, every doubt tested. If that happens, the current wave of skepticism fades. Not instantly, but gradually. Because clarity replaces uncertainty. And when clarity wins, the system doesn't just reach a conclusion, it reinforces trust. Path 2, doubt expands, trust breaks down. But there's another path. And this is the one people are quietly watching for. If the process continues to move forward without full visibility, if key details remain delayed or limited, and if hearings proceed before all sides say they're fully prepared, then something else happens. The focus shifts completely away from the accused and onto the system itself. And once that shift locks in, it's hard to reverse. Because now the question isn't, did this person do it? It becomes, can we trust how this case was handled? And that question is much bigger than any single trial. If doubt continues to grow, every outcome becomes contested. Every decision becomes debated. Every conclusion becomes incomplete in the eyes of the public. Even if the legal process reaches a clear verdict, the perception might not follow. And perception, in cases like this, doesn't disappear. It lingers. It evolves. It becomes part of how the entire situation is remembered. Why this moment is so critical. This is the point where everything is still undecided. The system can still tighten up, release more information, align timelines, reduce the gaps people are questioning. Or, those gaps can remain long enough for skepticism to harden into belief. Because once people stop waiting for answers and start assuming conclusions, the narrative changes permanently. And right now, that shift hasn't fully happened yet. But it's close. You can feel it in the way the conversation is evolving. At first, it was about the event itself. Then it became about the suspect. Now, it's about the process. And when a case reaches that stage, it's no longer just a legal situation. It becomes a test of credibility. The real question moving forward. This isn't about picking sides. It's not about confirming theories. It's about one core issue. Will the process match the level of scrutiny it's under? Because the scrutiny isn't going away. If anything, it's increasing. More eyes, more analysis, more attention to every detail. And under that level of attention, only two things can happen. The process proves itself solid, or the pressure exposes weaknesses. Where it stands right now. As of now, the story is still open. Nothing is fully resolved. Nothing is fully disproven. It's a live situation, unfolding in real time, with new information shaping how everything is interpreted. And that's what makes it so intense. Because you're not watching a finished story. You're watching the moment where the ending is being decided. If you've made it this far, you already know, this isn't just another headline. This is one of those cases where every detail matters, and every update can shift the entire narrative. So don't just scroll past the next development, stay locked in. Because the next piece of information that drops might be the one that finally pushes this story fully toward clarity, or deeper into uncertainty. And when it happens, you'll want to see it for yourself, not just hear about it after the fact.